Hey everybody, today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. So I'm actually going to be unboxing a product that I designed, the Jordan T4G, which was from probably 2006, and comparing it to a confirmation sample that I have. So this was basically a final prototype. A confirmation sample is kind of what locks the design before moving to production. And then this is obviously in a men's size 9, because that's what all confirmation samples are in. And then this is a production sample. So this is actually a dead stock example that a good friend of mine found in his old storage unused, and it happens to be in my size, size 11, which is really cool. So he reached out and was like, hey, do you want this old production sample of something you designed? So let's get into the Jordan T4G. So this shoe was designed to be kind of a lightweight hybrid between kind of like a cross-training shoe, a running shoe, and a basketball shoe. So one thing you'll notice out of the gate is a little bit narrower and lower than a traditional basketball shoe, and that's because it's built on a running shoe last. It's actually built on the QD10, which is kind of the classic Nike running shoe, like kind of like every Air Max is basically built on that last. So one thing you see kind of out of the gate is a little bit sleeker than your typical basketball shoe. Let's get the other side out here. Really cool to get this dead stock pair of shoes that I designed like out of the blue. So a few things that I'm going to be looking for between the confirmation sample in size 9 and the production is just, I want to be looking for to make sure that all the kind of stitching is right, all the details are made right, everything is kind of scaled up correctly. And just looking for even little material things like, you'll notice this underlay is actually a little piece of 3M in here that kind of picks up the light just so, and it looks like they got that correct in the production sample. You can just, looks like they skipped out and put in the 3M below the purse here though, but overall still kind of the same intent. One thing that's really different between the two that I see out of the gate is that all the logos are embroidered on the sample, which I think just feels a little bit nicer, has a little bit nice of a hand feel, but it's really hard to get things like the Jumpman consistent in embroidery, especially on these kinds of perfed materials like this. So I could see in production, they switched this to an HF weld, which at the time in 2006, that was pretty early for things like welding. So it was a cool little piece of technology, but I don't think it feels quite as premium to the touch, especially at this, how big it is here. And then they also welded these 6 little dots. So this was a little magnetic piece here. Yeah, they used a nice magnetic piece just to hold the strap in place. One thing I don't like about shoes with straps is if this kind of floats up while you're playing, you can imagine this kind of, we're just kind of rubbing in an uncomfortable way. So I added this little bit here to kind of lock the strap in place, kind of like a belt loop, but also allows you to easily get it open in case you really want to open that up and then adjust it. And then notice just a little hidden logo below everything here. Looks like they didn't use quite the correct typeface here. You can see the difference in the typeface for this embroidered logo. They stretched it up a little bit, which is not good, but happens. Moving around the rest of the shoe. So, one thing, this shoe came out in between the Jordan 21 and the 22. So you could see a little bit of influence from both shoes. So you notice that the 21 had a lot of deco stitching that was really meant to kind of show off the quality of the product, this kind of contrast stitching. The tough thing of contrast stitching is it has to be done just right. So you could see, it gets a little wavy in places, especially where 2 stitches are joining right here. So overall good. I mean, this is a $100 shoe, which was probably the cheapest shoe in the Jordan lineup at the time. So overall pretty good quality. But those are some of the influences from the 21. The 22, if you remember, it was all inspired by kind of stealth bombers and had this more angular language. So a lot of these little details came from that language. So it kind of basically predicted what that would be kind of going forward. One of the other things that both the 21 and the 22 had was heavy use of real carbon fiber. We couldn't afford to use real carbon fiber in a $100 shoe, but we're able to get this really nice effect here where we're just using a woven textile under a piece of TPU. In the sample was a little bit heat treated to get a nice kind of heel shape here. A little bit less so in the production, but still pretty overall good effect. And then in the shank, you'll notice in this pre-production sample, this is a hard molded external shank to get some really nice rigidity in the midfoot. They actually laid in the textile into the mold and then shot the plastic around that to get this really nice kind of carbon fibery effect. Not quite the same in the production sample. I actually remember this switch to drive a little cost out, so very hard to see on camera here. But actually what we did was just texture the back side of the mold and then shot this in kind of a tinted black to give a similar effect. But it doesn't come off quite as premium as it does with the laid-in textile. You could just kind of see the way it flows with the textile a little bit nicer. So like I said, this shoe was meant to be a hybrid between a running shoe, a training shoe, and a basketball shoe. It was really designed to be kind of a warm-up shoe or a practice shoe. So you could play some quick practice games in it. You could do practice drills and maybe run a few laps, lift weights. So it's constructed a lot more like a running shoe. Still a little bit of an outrigger, like you'd see in a trainer, but not quite as much of a high glue margin as you'd see in a basketball shoe. And the rubber wrap only comes to the toe. Again, a little bit of a hybrid between a basketball shoe and a running shoe, where a running shoe would just have this little narrow toe wrap here for delamination because it's all about linear motion. A basketball shoe, this rubber wrap might come around more towards here because you're getting a lot of lateral movements and you don't want the shoe to delaminate on the court. And then this was coming out right around the same time as Nike Free, so you could see that influence in the forefoot. Again, that highlighting that hybrid between a running shoe and a basketball shoe. So much more flexible in the toe than a typical basketball shoe. Which a lot of people was one of the reasons why a lot of people really liked this shoe. It didn't sell a ton. I think it only moved about 70,000 units, but the people that got it tended to really like it. Couple little changes you could see the way in the sample. This is a little bit tighter, so this is like a line-on-line stock fit type of a situation here where everything had to be very carefully fit together. I think it makes obviously for a much cleaner look, but also much harder to do in production, especially at a $100 price point. So I remember we actually changed the tooling drawings to have these little trenches basically, so you could see that the foam actually wraps the rubber a little bit versus here it's flush. And that just allowed the factory to just kind of drop the rubber into the foam a little bit more cleanly, so there wasn't a lot of excess glue. But again, I preferred it like this, a little bit cleaner, a little bit nicer of a pop, but the concessions we had to do to make it for production. One of the other kind of neat things about this shoe is the branding in the heel, very reminiscent of the Jordan 15. I just always really loved that kind of, the way they branded the Jordan 15 with the ribs on the heel counter and the Jumpman behind the ribs. And since the 22 was all going to be about this kind of stealth theme, I thought that would be a really fun way to get the Jordan branding in there. So you can see there's just kind of 3 levels to this TPR piece. So you have obviously the base web level, and then the second level is the Jordan word mark, and then the third level being the ribs. Another notable thing on the outsole, again, kind of coming out between the 21 and the 22, this had the 21's dual layer traction, which was designed by my friend Jason Maiden. So this DNA inspired traction pattern. It's actually at 2 different levels, so you get these 2 different levels of this sharp edge of the traction. Again, the thought being that as a practice shoe, you'd be wearing this, and you might be wearing the traction down, and as you wore it down, you'd start to engage the second level of traction. So it still would kind of remain like a nice, fresh shoe with crisp traction. And then also notice this other little thing. To me, these little details are all about what make a design, go from good to great. So notice how this base layer of the rubber is actually shiny. And that's because when you mold the shoe, this part of the mold is the tallest part of the mold. So it's actually really easy to specify, like, hey, come back in and just polish that top layer. And so all they're doing is really polishing the top layer of that metal mold. So when they mold the rubber outsole, you get this really high shine just at the base of the rubber, which again, just these super minor details that I feel like when you're doing a shoe like a Jordan, it's a product that a kid might kind of take home and look at and study before he wears it, just kind of make it a little bit more special. Another detail from the 21 is this quilted lining. The time, so this was again 2006, I think this shoe came out, maybe 2007. So we were designing it in 05, 06. And MJ's favorite car at the time was his Continental GT. And so all these kind of interior lining details, very much inspired by details in the Continental GT. Just bringing in those subtle little influences. And then just doing even these tiny little story hits that I love, like the little welded grips on this lockdown for the strap. There's 6 of them. And why there's 6 is because, Mike won 6 championships. So little details like that, if you were a nerd, if you were really thinking about it, you might pick up on things like that or surmise things like that. And to me, I think those little details just make it special. One of the cool things about this shoe, obviously lack of laces, all these kind of different dynamic strap lockdowns, the idea being to kind of get in and out of the shoe quick. So if you were doing a warm-up before a game, you could switch into your game shoe really quick, and doing everything we could to kind of eliminate weight. So really just this kind of lightweight synthetic Mitobuck, but even keeping that kind of minimal, and then kind of a sock-like construction, removing material where we didn't need it. And that was really inspired by, I remember Tinker telling me a story that in the 80s when he was designing basketball shoes with Mike Avini, they used to go out on lunch and play basketball, one-on-one basketball, and whenever you got a point scored on you, you had to cut off something from your shoe. And so the game ended when somebody's shoes fell off. And they were doing that very intentionally to figure out, like, what's the most minimal shoe they could make. And a lot of that thinking is what ended up going into like the 1990s like Huarache series. So again, just a little subtle nod to that early kind of Tinker Mike Avini thought process of removing material that maybe we didn't need, and which would also maybe alleviate some material around the malleolus, making it a little bit more comfortable. So it's been really interesting to unbox a shoe that I designed and haven't really looked at in, I don't know, I probably haven't looked at this thing in like 12 years. So really, really happy that my friend reached out and hooked me up with this pair of dead stock T4Gs, a nice little blast from the past for me, and really fun to kind of review the design and take a look at the differences between the pre-production confirmation sample and a production sample in my size. So thanks for joining. Hope you enjoyed this little walk down memory lane on the Jordan T4G. I'll try to keep this series going with all the different things that I kind of bring into my life. Thanks for following along. Like and subscribe if you want to see more. And yeah, until then, keep designing.